Hello, editing students. I'm sorry I'm unable to be there with you today. Had a little bit of a medical emergency, and I will be back next Friday, though. So for today, what I wanted to do is go into talking about some video transitions and also an automate to sequence. It looks like we're going to have two in-class projects, and if we have time, I want to start getting into how to do basic graphics, lower thirds, some of that stuff as well. We'll see how much time we have and we'll go from there. So what I need you to do is pay attention to this demonstration, take notes on the demonstration. If you have any questions about the demonstration, write it down and email me. The other thing is too, before you guys start up, make sure your hard drives are plugged in. And if anybody has a new hard drive and needs footage, you guys could share that with them as well and get that set up. All right, so let's get started. The first thing we need to do is open a project or create a project. So you're going to have to launch Premiere. And in this case, we're just going to open a project. We already have files on our hard drive in folder number 4. And that's what we're going to start working with first. So I'm going to show this again. I'm going to demo this, and then I'm going to have you do it. Some of you, it's brand new. Others, this is pretty simple for you because you've done it before. So just follow along, pay attention, and save your project as well as project number 3. So I'm just going to go to my desktop where I have my my hard drive, and I'm going to go to the PR lessons and PR04, and we're going to take the 401 project. So make sure you grab the 401 project to start with, and we'll open that project. And what we're going to call it, instead of 401, we could call it project 03. And then save that. It'll save in your folder, follow the prompts, okay? If I go check in my passport folder, and if I go to the lessons and I go to 4, you can see that project 3 was just saved there. So that's the project. So this way you don't overwrite any of your projects if we want to go back to them later on. Okay, so we're back here in the interface of Premiere. And as you can see over here, we're going to have some footage to work with that they're going to load in for us. And our sequence is also already made. But again, I'm going to change my format. So this was something that we did as a first in-class project, where you would go to your window, workspaces, and choose the workspace that you saved. So I'll choose video editing, and it will automatically rearrange to the format and display how I like to work. So if you haven't done that yet and created this, I highly recommend going back and doing that so you teach yourself how to do that. All right. So again, we're looking at some clips that we have that's already loaded in here. This again is our sequence, our timeline. We have the Boston Bridge pan and the Boston to the TD Garden. So let's open this up real quick and just take another quick look at what we have and what we're working with here. We can see the footage here that we're working with is at a frame rate of 29.97 frames. And what we can also see is our raster dimensions here. It's 720 by 480, which means that we are at standard def. So this video is not high def we're working with. It's a standard def video timeline. So just want to make sure everybody understands that. Again, if you want to look at your assets in a different way, if you want to look at them in icon view, you would just click icon view, and you'd be up here and you could see them in icon view. So it's up to you how you like to look at your stuff. I actually like it as a list view. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the Boston Bridge pan and double click that, and it's going to load it into my source monitor. Now that it's in my source monitor, I'm going to review the footage in there, and then I'm going to make a select by choosing in and choosing out. So I'll let it play through. Or if I want to work a little faster, I can scrub it through and see what I have to work with. It looks like there's a tilt up, and it looks like there's a pan from left to right. So I'll just take the pan. We'll take a simple pan. I'm going to mark it in by pressing I, or this option here, mark in, right there. And where we want to mark out is O, or that option as well. So I'll let it play out for a couple seconds. I'm going to press O, going to mark it out. If you want to clear your ins or your outs, it'll be the Alt Option I and Alt Option O. That'll clear an in, clear an out. If you want to clear them both at the same time, again, that's Alt Option X. Will clear your ins and outs if you want to start over. So let me bring those back. And if you want to just bring in the video, you could easily just grab that video and drag it in. But again, I don't recommend the drag and drop, but you could work however you like to work. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at my track selectors, video 1 and audio 1. And what I'm going to do is I'll deselect my audio. And I'm going to look at my playhead here. And again, my playhead is my default in. When we talked about the 3-point edit, an in, an out, and another in. So by default, this is my in. So I'll just bring that back to the beginning of the timeline, and I'm going to select overwrite. Once I click that, my source video will drop into my timeline on video track 1 only. There it is right there. I'll zoom into it a little bit. We have the plus and minus keys for a quick zoom. We'll zoom right into that. So now, in my timeline, I have this select dropped in my timeline. You can play it out hitting the space bar, or you can also use the controllers here as well. So what I'm going to do, instead of using my playhead as an endpoint, I'm going to go to my last frame. And if you hold shift and click, it'll snap. You can also turn snap on through a main menu item over there, but I'd rather just use my shift key because I don't like the snap to always be on, which means that it just snaps to the end of a segment and it'll lock it there. And as you can see, if we snap to that, we're actually on a black frame. So you're going to have to go back 1 frame. You can either click step back 1 frame left, or you can use your arrow keys and go back 1 frame. I'm going to do it there, and I'm going to say in. I'm going to just do an in there. And this way now I have an in marked there because I know that's where I'd like to come in with my next segment. And I'm going to load my next clip into the monitor before I drop my clip into the timeline, and it becomes a segment. Okay, so now here we are, the Boston TD Garden. There's another pan. I might do the tilt. I think the zoom looks a little sloppy. You know, you really don't see that bridge that well. So I think I'm just going to use this, like, we could use a tilt up just for a different type of let's use the pan. Let's go for the pan. This is a little sloppy, but let's do it. So, okay, so the TD Garden, again, another left to right. That's okay. So I'll just go there in. Again, I'll do about another 5 seconds. I'm just going to play it out and count in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just something in the general area, and mark it out. So now I have an in, I have an out, and I have an in here. So when I go to overwrite this, it's going to take my in and it's going to match it to my in here. Looking at my track selectors again, I do not have any audio selected because there's really just, you know, sound of traffic. Even though all of this is selected to the out, it's going to only drop in what I need here. So I'll drop that in. So I have almost equal lengths of these 2 clips, and we can trim it back if we want to trim it back a little bit. These were tools we talked about in the last class. So practice again with these as well. And now what we're going to do is drop a transition. Right now we have a straight cut going from one segment to another. And what we're going to do is drop in a transition now. If you go to your project window, by default you'll have an effects window there as well. So double click that tab. And in here you're going to have a bunch of different types of effects. We're just going to focus on video transitions for today. We'll get into these other ones. We're just going to focus on video transitions. If you have time and you want to play with some video effects, go for it, but we'll be doing that later on in another class. So I'm going to open up my video transitions. We've got a bunch of different ones here. I'm probably just going to demo the wipes, maybe an iris, page peel, but our main would be a dissolve. For a lot of the work that you guys will be doing in your BFA program, the majority of your work will probably require some sort of dissolve, if not just straight cuts. Maybe a dip to black, dip to white, and morph cuts, which we'll get into, which is another kind of dissolve that kind of hides jump cuts. Anyway, by default, your transition is set for a cross dissolve, and you can tell because it's highlighted by blue. If you wanted to say, I'm doing a bunch of dip to whites and you want that to be your default transition, because there's a shortcut for that, you can easily right click that and say set that as your default transition. So anytime a transition is dropped in by default, that's the transition that is the go-to transition. So you usually just change that by just right clicking and set selected as default transition. Cool. Now that we have that done, and again, I like shortcuts. I like doing things faster, and if I'm always using dissolves, I'd rather use a shortcut for a dissolve. But in this case, I'm going to show you the drag and drop, which is simply click on the dissolve, drag it to where your edit point is over here, and then you're going to let it go. So we'll take our cross dissolve, and we'll drop it right there. We could drop it further to the left or further to the right, however you want to do it, but let's try to get it right on the center there and let it go. So now that you let this go, your default transition time is also at 1 second. So you have 15 frames on your outgoing and 15 frames on your ingoing. And what it's basically doing is taking the handles of the video, the hidden video that you don't see, this extra video segments that are there. What it's going to do is take those and it's actually going to stretch them out over each other. So you get this nice kind of soft transition from one segment to another. So if you play it out, that's a 1 second transition. Now, if you wanted to manipulate that transition, you can go to the end of it, right on your timeline, and you can trim it in and out. You can also go in, double click on this, just hit OK. It's telling me right there, I got a 1 second transition. You can change that as well, but go up to your effect controls in your source monitor, click that, and now you have your transition right here that you're working with in kind of a different type of setup. You could play it and watch a default transition, what it would look like before maybe you want to play it. But you're also able to go in here and take your transition and you can make it a little longer, make it a little shorter. It's up to you where you want to work, if you like working in the timeline or you would rather work in your effect controls area as well. You could even drag these more to the left, more to the right. You can play them out in here. It's like a little mini timeline up here that corresponds to your main timeline at the bottom. We can actually show the actual sources in here and just play them to see what it would look like in like a little thumbnail. But our transitions now are pretty much, a lot of these are real time, which means it doesn't take any rendering. If you want to hit play, you're able to actually see it happen live. If something needs to be rendered, what will happen is it won't play out live and you'll need to render that. So that's the basics of just dragging and dropping and adding an effect to your segments in your timeline at an edit point. So if we want to get rid of it, I'm just hovering over it, click it, delete it, I'll get rid of that. So I just wanted to show you the shortcuts for your transition. If you go into, I have to select it, sorry. If I go into my sequence, I have an apply default transition option here, which in this case it's Shift D. So that Shift D, if I have this selected, I'm just clicking on it here just so it knows where it is. If I hit Shift D, that transition will drop in right away. It's based on what you've selected. So if I was to go through and select this segment by just clicking on it, holding Shift and clicking the next segment, and I go and I do Shift D, it's actually going to add it to everything because it's going to add it to the beginning because I've selected that segment and I've selected this segment. So what's going to happen is you could easily just apply a bunch of your default transitions to all of your segments in your timeline. So you don't need to go through, if you're putting a bunch of segments together back to back to back, like say a montage of photos or something like that. You don't have to click and drag on each single edit point. You can just select them all and have your default transition be applied to all of your segments. I'm going to show you a couple of other ones real quick that would need some rendering. So let's see, maybe like an iris box. It's going to show up red when I drag and drop that on there. And your iris box will look like that. Now, because it's red, when you go to play it, this will still play through, which is nice, but it will need to be rendered for your final output. So this is something you really don't have to worry about until the end. But if you were to play a segment and you have a transition on it and nothing shows up, it's just black or it says unrendered, what you need to do is just go up to your sequence, and what you could do is you could render your selection, you could render into out, based on what you have selected. So right now I don't have anything selected, so I could render everything from in to out, which is just your enter key by default. You can see that, it's a shortcut. Enter, render into out. Render selection is not available because nothing is selected. So again, if I was to select that, go up to sequence, I would now be able to just render the selection. And it will go through, and what it will do is the math so it can play back in real time at high resolution without dropping any frames. It'll just go through. Okay, it's done. So the red is now changed to green, and it looks good. Most of the stuff we watch when we play back, if it's lower resolution, it's fine as we're editing, but on our final output, we always want to make sure that everything is at the highest quality possible for your final output, and that's where rendering comes into play. So again, what you're going to do for this next project in class, and I'm going to show you how to automate the sequence next, but if you want to take notes on this, this is emailed to you already, but you're going to open project, it's pr0401.prpoj, that's your project, and you're going to rename that to project 3, and you're going to save that into your folder. And you're going to assemble a 2-clip sequence, keep it very simple, and add a transition, and play with a couple of the different transitions. So say like a wipe, we'll do drop barn doors on there. It'll overwrite the one that's already on there, and it'll be a barn doors effect on there. And again, double click, just go through that, but you have now options for borders. You can add a border to that as well if you want. You can change the border color if you want. You could reverse the animation on that as well. So there's a couple different things you can do here in your effects controls to manipulate your transitions. And then leave pretty much everything else by default. You can play with these sliders as well. What'll happen here, the transition won't finish to the end. It'll stop at a certain point before it cuts out. So it'll cut out before it fully finishes. So play around with it, experiment with your transitions, get used to dropping in a default transition, get used to using your track selectors over here. Woo, your track selectors, trying to zoom in for you, and what you need over here. If you need audio or don't need audio, just try to keep it clean and use that process. Try to go away from your drag and drops with your clips to segments. Obviously, the only way you can not do a drag and drop is with a default transition selected with these. So these are definitely drag and drop. Again, just double click, go through. If you didn't finish working on last week's project, which was using A-roll and B-roll with the reporter and the crime scene, work on that as well. And we're going to go on and move on to show you really quickly how to automate a sequence, as if you had a bunch of still pictures and need to just lay them in for a quick montage. I want to show you how to do what we call an automate to sequence. It's taking a group of stills and selecting them and having them go straight into the timeline in the order that you arrange them with the default transition. So I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Open Project, and we're going to go back to our folder number 4 for lessons, and it's the 402 project this time. I'm going to choose that. I'm going to call that Project 4 and hit OK. And then follow through like we normally do with everything that we're working with. Okay, my interface opens up again. By default, it lays out to Premiere's default. And what I'm going to do is go to my window, workspaces, and my video editing, and it'll automatically rearrange it. So like I said, if you didn't do this yet and create this yet, I would go through and do that. It's as simple as rearranging your windows in their little drop zones by dragging and dropping into the drop zones, and then going to your window, your workspaces, and save your new workspace and give it a name. Let's go to our project window and see what we're working with here. We've got a sequence, Safari slideshow, and a bin called Safari Images with a bunch of different shots of animals. So what I could do is, if I wanted to see those animals and rearrange them, I could do that in here if I wanted to open this up and go to this view and Safari Images here and rearrange them. And I could actually even take this tab and bring it up top. And now I have a view, say if I'm working with some other stuff down the road that's more of a list view, but I do have access to my images as thumbnails. Okay, so there's different ways you can do this. It's where the drag and drop tabbed bins come in handy, tabbed windows come in handy. So I'm going to look at these Safari Images, and what you can do is by default these all came in at 5 seconds. They're really long. If you double click them, load them into your source monitor, they're really long. They're like really long. But right now the selections are only 5 seconds, so you could shorten them if you wanted to by changing your ins and your outs, make them longer if you want, but we're just going to keep them by default at 5 seconds. So what I'm looking at here is maybe I want to change the order of, the animals and when they show up. Instead of having the bull, a cheetah, and a cheetah, maybe what I'll do is have a cheetah, have an elephant, and then maybe what we'll do is pull the rhino in, and I'm just dragging them and moving them around where I'd like to place them. So I'm kind of putting things in the order that I like them. This is really good for storyboarding, going on to sites that have stock footage, stock stills. Even if you don't purchase them, you can get a thumbnail of them and create a layout in the window itself, in the bin itself. And then what we could do is drop these all in the order right in the timeline that we have arranged them. So again, you don't even really have to go in here in your source monitor unless you're going to be changing the length of these clips. So what I'm going to do is just select them all the ones that I want to use. And I am going to go back to my effects tab that we were in before. And I'm going to go to my transitions, my video transitions, and see what my default transition is that I'd like to fall between each of these clips once they go into timeline and become segments. So I'm looking at, by default, cross dissolve is selected, and that's fine. You could play with it, change it, see what it looks like, and then go from there. But I'm going to just leave straight up cross dissolve. Go back to Safari Images. I'm going to go up to clip in the menu for our drop down. Something to think about when you're working in your project window, they're clips, right? And then when you're working in here, you're working in your timeline or your sequence. So when I look at the menu, and if I'm going to manipulate something in, say in this area, my project window, I'd probably go to my clip drop down. If I'm going to manipulate something in my timeline, I'd probably go to my sequence drop down. So just, keep that in mind. That's kind of a quick go-to, where do I go to find what I'm looking for. So in here, I'm going to go into clip, and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see it. I'm going to go to clip, and I'm going to have this option called automate to sequence. So it's basically going to take all of these clips in the order that I've arranged them, and it's going to automatically put them in the sequence with my default transition. So once I select this, another window will pop up. Here we have automate to sequence window. I'm going to do the ordering in the sort order. So by default, everything should just be fine here, and you can follow straight through unless you need to change something. If you don't want to apply a default transition, you can change that. You could turn that off for your audio and your video. So even if they were segments that you're going to be putting in that are going to have, sound and video, you can actually do a transition onto them as well, but it's based on your default audio transition. So you'd have to go through and set that default transition. All right, so all you do is click OK, and by default, again, my playhead is my endpoint, and that's where to line them up from. And it drops them all in. They're all in the timeline now. And I'm going to zoom in using the plus key. There you go. I'll zoom in just a tiny bit more. And you can see they all have the cross dissolves already on them. They're all dropped in there. We're able to play them out with the transitions. And if you wanted a transition in the front, you just select it. I'm just selecting up here. Just going through and just clicking on it. And from the previous lesson, Shift D, there's a cross dissolve there. And if I wanted to go and add one at the end, Shift D. I don't need to go back up and drag and drop them down. You know, can easily just do Shift D. And then you can play them out and watch how nice they are. And, you know, in some of the advanced classes that we get into, we'll do something very similar, but we'll animate these. So they're moving, the Ken Burns effects, I think we might have mentioned in a previous class. But yeah, this is a pretty nice little quick down and dirty way to just get everything in there with transitions. Nice fast automate to sequence. So for this assignment in class, what you need to do is go and open its PR0402.prpoj and just call that project number 4 when you save it again, so we're not overwriting the original project. And just create a sequence using the automate to sequence and drop a crossfade or a dissolve onto the beginning and to the end. So you fade in and you fade out. And it's up to you if you want to grab the whole sequence and, you know, position it at the beginning or wherever your playhead is. It's up to you, but start to practice. This is your time to practice and, you know, start getting used to some of these shortcuts and different techniques used for a faster way for you guys to edit.